Alright, in this tutorial I will show you how to spawn enemies in general in Unity, how you can make a monster spawner like in Minecraft, and also how you can spawn enemies in waves. The scripts for these will be available in the description, they will be highly customizable, and the examples I show will work in both Unity 3D and Unity 2D. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Starting off, all I have in my project is a player and an enemy. And the scripts for these will be available in the description if you want them. But just so you know, the player has basic movement, and the enemy will follow the player by searching for a player tag like this. So, we're going to start first by just spawning things simply. We want to be able to spawn multiple instances of this enemy here, so what we can do is make a prefab for it, and that can be done by dragging it from the hierarchy to the assets window here, just like so. Now I'm going to make a new game object that will represent the spawner itself. I'm going to use a sprite of a mob spawner from Minecraft, drag it on there. Now let's make a script for it, and I will call it enemy spawner. Opening up that script, we'll start by creating a game object field for the enemy prefab that we want to actually spawn. You're going to remove the start function, go into the update function, and we can just say if input.getKeyDown keycode E. Then we will call the spawn enemy method, which we haven't created yet. So let's create that next. This will be a private method with no return type. And all we're going to do is just instantiate that enemy prefab. Our first argument for this method will be the enemy prefab, and we want to spawn it right where that spawner is located. To do that, we can just specify the game object the script is attached to is transforms position. And then quaternion.identity just means spawn it without any rotation applied to it. So that's enough for our first example. Let's go back to our project, and we'll go ahead and drag that script onto that spawner object. I'm also going to drag the enemy prefab into that field on the script. Then we can try it out. Pressing E, we see we do get an enemy spawning, and it spawns right where the spawner is located. Obviously, you wouldn't want to just press a key and have them spawn. This is just to give you a basic example. So let's build off of this. The next thing we'll do is make the spawner behave just like the mob spawners in Minecraft. To make a monster spawner, we're going to need to make some pretty big changes to that script. So let's go back to the code. We're going to start by making some fields. We will have a min and max for the amount of enemies that can spawn in a given batch, and then the minimum and maximum amount of time that it takes for a batch of enemies to spawn. And then finally, the size of the spawn radius. Now let's change that update method to start, and we also are going to want to bring in system.collections. The reason why is we want to have a coroutine here using IEnumerator. What that will do is allow us to continuously spawn over time. I'm going to call it private IEnumerator spawn enemies. And we're going to have a loop that executes indefinitely, so while true, we'll just do the following. We'll determine how long we want to wait for the next spawn batch by getting a random between our min and max spawn interval. Then we will wait for that amount of time, which you can do with yield return new wait for seconds. Then after that, we'll decide how many enemies we want to spawn, using that min and max batch size that we've set earlier. Finally, we will use a for loop and spawn each enemy in a random position inside a circle that is the size of our spawn radius. Then we can factor in the spawner's position with that spawn offset we determined, and we can instantiate similar to our previous example by passing in the enemy prefab, our chosen spawn position, and quaternion.identity. Last thing for this example, we want to call start coroutine spawn enemies inside the start method like so. Alright, so that should be it for the script. Let's now go back to our editor. You can see that that script changed on our spawner. We will need to redrag that enemy prefab into that slot. So we should be good there. Now let's try to test it out. We'll see after waiting a bit, more enemies do in fact spawn. So it's working as you would expect. Very nice. Very similar to how the spawner works in Minecraft. So, my final example will be how to spawn enemies in waves. This one will be kind of simple, and it'll be sort of a combination of our previous examples. So, we're going to take these fields out, but we will leave that enemy prefab in. We're going to create a field for the amount of enemies we want to spawn in every wave, and also the amount of spacing each enemy will have between them, so that we don't spawn them all in the exact same position. Then we want to change that start method back to update, and we will just say if the player presses space, we will call a method called spawn wave. So let's create that method here. It's going to be private, and all it will do is go through a loop for however many enemies we decide to spawn in a wave. We'll determine our spawn position based on the spawner's transform, and also factoring in our spawn spacing. And then we can just instantiate it, like so. Very similar to our previous examples. So I'm going to take off the spawner sprite, because it's not really acting like a mob spawner anymore. Now we need to drag that enemy prefab once again onto our script. Then I'm going to move the spawner's transform a little bit further away from the player. Finally, let's test it out. Pressing space, it does indeed spawn a wave of enemies. So obviously you're not going to make spawning a wave contingent on the player pressing space, but hopefully these various examples give you an idea of how you could approach something similar in your project. But if you still have questions or need help in some way, by all means leave a comment. Other than that, have a great day. Peace.